we're going to start with Josh Stafford, if we can get his presentation up, please. Josh has been a registered nurse for 16 years, and following his time working in emergency departments at Wollongong Hospital and on the Isle of Man, he's made the decision to move to Arakunan, is that how I say it? Up on Queensland's Cape York Peninsula, so we're all very envious. It's beautiful. His professional interests include ear health. He was instrumental in setting up an ENT surgical service to several communities in Cape York. In his spare time, he enjoys scuba diving and travelling anywhere that doesn't have a mobile phone reception. So welcome to Josh.
Thank you. And yeah, I have come from far north Queensland, which is hence the jumper here. So currently, my role is the Director of Nursing for the Lockhart River and Cowan clinics, which are both predominantly Indigenous communities on the Cape York. Lockhart River there on the eastern side, and Cowan, which is about 3.5 hours drive down south. But from 2007 to May last year, I was in Arakunan, which is over on the Western Cape over there, for 9 years, and 5 of those I was the Director of Nursing. So for a while now, and for a while, my role has been that of a manager, but first and foremost, I consider myself to be a remote area nurse. The role of the RAN is quite varied, and it varies from state to state and region to region. But I think the best way of summing up what we do is that we pretty much do everything that needs to be done in community that's even remotely based around medicine, or remotely medically based. So my experiences have been vast and varied. And the next picture, I didn't realise the screen was going to be so big. So there's my, from delivering babies at 2 o'clock in the morning with no one else around, to fixing up dogs that think they can take on Toyota Land Cruisers. I'm happy to say Dobby is much of a menace on 3 legs as he's on 4. And following that baby's about 6 years old now. Lisa, who's next to me, went into midwifery, and I went into management. So... Why did I do it? I did it because I wanted to experience something different. I wasn't really satisfied in the role I was in, and that's nothing against Wollongong ED, but I just felt inherently that I could do more. I felt like I could experience more than what I was experiencing at the time, and that I wanted to be challenged both professionally and personally. And that I have been. I think that in my time I've experienced every emotion under the sun, and sometimes all in one day. From thrombolising someone with an MI with only 2 other nurses within 300 kilometres, to sitting in the dirt watching a house opening ceremony, and that's some of the photos I've got up top there, to then getting called into the clinic for an 18-month-old that's not breathing, and all with no prospect of having a drink at the end of the day, because we work in dry communities up there. But yeah, wow. but for it, I think I'm actually a better person for it. Professionally, I'm a diversely skilled specialist, and personally, I now have a tenfold increase in people that I call my family. So how did I do it? In Queensland, we have a document called, and Australia-wide actually, the Primary Clinical Care Manual. This is a comprehensive document that contains over 300 pages of information on most presentations that we can encounter. I've got a couple of slides up here, and this is the impetigo health management plan. Impetigo school sores is a very, very common condition up in the Cape, and one I actually hadn't come across before going up there, but now I've probably seen thousands of times. And what the PCCM does here is it gives a clinician a thorough template of which to work, what to look for, what direction to take, and a standardised approach to treatment. And also, I think that the title of this slide was "How did I do it?" And pretty simply is that I pretty much love my job, and I really, really enjoy the people that I work with. I get to work with some of the most resilient, capable, and friendly people in the country, and that's just the people in the community. So what's the future of the role? Communities in Cape York are currently engaged in transitioning the delivery of healthcare services to a community control model. It's a really complex issue, and just well outside the scope of this presentation to do justice to an explanation, other than to say that the research does show that health outcomes improve dramatically under this sort of governance structure. The Aboriginal Medical Service in the Cape is a Punapima, and they're doing and have done some excellent stuff with some excellent outcomes. But with any change management process, it's a long road that we're going down, and there's a lot of issues to be ironed out. The future of the RAN is somewhat secure, but it will involve, especially in the Cape, a more collaborative approach to delivering healthcare. Gone are the days of single nurse posts, and that came to the highlight with that tragedy that happened last year. And we're moving towards a more community-driven, collaborative approach to delivering a tailored service for each individual community. And finally, the last slide was a piece of advice, and I did rewrite this slide 100 times, but I think the best piece of advice I have to give is that if you want to be challenged professionally, personally, if you've got a sense of adventure, have resilience and an ability to affect change on an individual basis without getting distracted by the preconceived ideas, give it a go, because most nurses are surprised by what they can accomplish. So, thank you.
Thanks, Josh. What an amazing presentation. We'll go through the panel and then if we've got some time at the end, we'll do a bit of Q&A. So next up is Margaret Fry. So if we get her presentation, please. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read Marg's bio because she's well known to most of you. But Professor Margaret Fry is a local girl from Sydney, and I think you all know her well enough to just jump on in.
Oh, thanks so much. It's just a privilege. Sorry, I was just doing filming and I thought I would have dressed a bit better had I known I was sucked into doing that. But anyway, in fact, what I want to talk about and just did at the film is what I want to talk about here, and it's an amazing and humbling experience to hear some of the stories such as yours, so thank you very much for that. I guess for me it's the same, the role and what difference it makes. Look, there is not a day that goes by as an academic I don't consider myself an emergency nurse, and I think that it's a reminder that, and yours is a great sort of segue, is every day you make a difference. Every day you save lives. Every day you make decisions that people's lives are saved, or the quality of their life is so much better for the very acts and thoughts that you have. So I remind you that, you know, for the role as an academic, it's slightly more distant, but the privilege of being able to be within the fraternity of emergency nursing is, I think there's no better discipline, and it's an extraordinary area of practice that, you know, we are very privileged to share the lives with our teams and with our patients. So for me, it was really, I guess, about transforming our environments. I'm sorry, because I can't actually see that. It's too small for me. And as I age a little bit as well. But anyway, continuing on, just in relation to the role and the difference it makes, look, I think the difference as an academic is it brings a considered thought that I would never have appreciated or valued, and probably through a lot of my career didn't value until I underwent that personal journey. And the difference that it makes in terms of considered around our practice, around inquiry, around the rigour that we investigate our practice. And it does, as you'll see, sort of start with just one project. But I think it is around what an academic brings is a considered way of looking at the world that is different to just being solely a clinician. So often I'll say, you've got to take your clinician hat off because it creates a lens of bias that limits our practice and inhibits the innovation that we can bring to our services. So sometimes we need to take off that clinician hat, but it's through an academic training that we're able and we learn to do that, and it is very different and it is a disciplined way of looking at the world. But it also allows me the enormous privilege of working beside you or mentoring you, and for me, as the twilight years of my life approach, hopefully not too quickly. Linda, I hope you're not in the room. I haven't done an ACP at this stage. But that aside, one of the things that I just think is the excitement and innovation and the opportunity to change the very landscape and fabric of healthcare. And, you know, for many of my colleagues in the room, maybe not quite as old, Julie, I won't point at you, or Kate, but, we've changed, and many of you have lived through the very changing of the landscape of healthcare as we knew it, as I did as a student nurse, first doing my hospital double certificate, then going on to my bachelor's, which was the old 5-year, which nearly killed me, but anyway, I survived it. And then we gained insight and we didn't have to do it for 5 years anymore. So then I thought I'd do a master's, and then I thought I'd do a PhD, and on it goes. But I think the thing is, it's such a privilege to be able to change things. And as an academic, I often work beside you in mentoring projects or leading projects or supervising projects that will transform practice. And so it does change how you look at the world. So, hey? 1 minute, that's right. So why did I do it is really a passion for lifelong learning. But the one thing that I believe is every one of us can be better than what we are sitting in this room today. And it has driven my curiosity and endlessly put me in positions where I've always challenged and asked why. So I think that's emergency nursing. But in relation to how did I do it to become an academic, I only wanted to be part of the team that would be the best emergency department in Australia. And so it was a process of pride. It was a process that we can be better than what we think we are. And so we moved, no matter what level of nursing in our department, but we strove to be better than what we could be. And for that, it was a great privilege. One of the things about the future is it's beholden on all of us to make the difference. And I would recommend looking at this podcast. I'm not going to show it, but it is an amazing 4-minute podcast, and it is worth looking at. And it is about the standards you walk past are the standards you accept. And so every one of us plays a role in shaping the very future and the quality of our care. And as an academic, I can help support that through a rigorous and academic process that builds the team and has effective quality care. So my last slide, you could see I couldn't decide. So I just thought I'd actually throw all the things that have made a difference in my life. So in terms of what's the best piece of advice, I wish I could live up to this all the time, but it's don't sweat the small stuff. But actually I sweat it all. I'm so stressed. But I think it's really important not to stress about it and don't sweat the small stuff. But without a doubt, I couldn't sit here if it was not for the team that I worked with. And many of you, you're here in this audience today, and only am I here because of you. And there's too many to call out your names, but I can see you, and it's you that made me the better person sitting here today. So it's about teamwork, and I think it is about the future depends on you. Don't hold back. Don't wait for someone to say it's a good idea. You've got them. You make it happen.
Thank you, Marg. Next up is Margaret Murphy. So Marg's a CNC at Westmead Hospital in Sydney. She's got an extensive clinical background in emergency nursing. She's had experience in intensive care, mental health, education and change management. And she's recognised by her peers with awards that include the Westmead Hospital Sydney Nurse of the Year in 2014. So for a clinical perspective, over to Marg.
Thank you, and again, it's a great honour to be asked just to give a 5-minute overview of the role of the clinical nurse consultant in emergency. I think this role it's quite unique in that you have the opportunity to use education, research, change management and clinical leadership, but stay at the coalface, and that was the main reason that I decided to kind of go down the pathway of being a clinical nurse consultant. I think that in this role, you're ideally placed to be across all disciplines. You like the molecular glue that kind of gets things happening. also understands what needs to happen. And again, as Mark said, being in that privileged position to work with staff to help develop them, and in that way work towards improving the service, which is our emergency nursing service. So it was really a passion to stay clinical, because that's all I was good at, I felt, and that's what I wanted to do. And so that kept me at the clinical coalface. Why did I do it? Specifically, I suppose we all want to make a difference, and the difference was to ensure that the emergency nursing service was operating at the highest level. And to do that, I felt I had the skills of education, research, and clinical expertise to help develop pathways, nursing standards, and ultimately patient care. How did I do it? As you know, there's 5 domains in a clinical nurse consultant's role. So clinical expertise is number 1, so clinical practice. So I went off and did a graduate certificate in emergency nursing. The next thing was education. So I thought, look, I like education, but I like to see the outcomes from education. So went off and did a master's in education. And so that was fabulous. It was able to kind of combine clinical management with education, and you could be a good clinician, but you're not always a great teacher. So understanding those skills. Then I realised after, once you settle into the role, you think, all right, you're a change agent, really. So you're this so-called, expert that is a change agent. So didn't know an awful lot about change management, so just thought I'd then explore the options for that. And so I had the opportunity to do a graduate diploma in change management. And last but not least, unfortunately, I spoke to Professor Kate White and then Kate Curtis, and then decided to do a PhD because I knew nothing about research. So I'm easily talked into things, and then I think, oh my gosh, where am I and what am I doing? But that's in all sincerity, it was just combining all those skills, which is skills we all need in our clinical interface to ensure that we're providing the best patient care. And for me, it was a step-by-step approach, getting comfortable doing education, getting comfortable understanding how to implement change, getting a bit more comfortable learning how to do research, and hopefully be able to translate that into better practice. The future of the role, I believe the future of the role is very challenging. I think that there's a lot of different terminologies around this role. We don't, a CNC in New South Wales is not the same as in Queensland. It's often seen as a soft role as well. We all go on about the importance of patient safety and quality care, but unfortunately, during times of budget cuts, etc., it's the role that is never replaced. So, you forever being very resilient, trying to encourage managers and administrators to see the importance and to value the role. And last but not least, my best piece of advice is probably 2 things. Do what you do well and work on what you don't do well. And last but not least, for me, it was about being connected, so never be too posh to wash. So stay connected with the clinical interface.
Thank you, Margaret, for those insights. Next, we have Matt Lutz. So Matt started working in ED at Royal North Shore in 1998, completed a master's degree in critical care, moved to the UK and worked as a nurse practitioner in the emergency and primary care till 2007. Came back to Australia, did a master's of nursing nurse practitioner at UTS, and then became an endorsed nurse practitioner. Matt's dabbling in research. We're convincing him that it's a sexy way to go. I'm reading here that he loves trail running, barbecue, beers and bourbon. But his real passion is his wife and his 2 little kids. So Matt's going to give us a point of view of the nurse practitioner in ED. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, and it's an honour to be speaking to all of my colleagues, so thank you for inviting me. And I don't think I can do as good a job as what you guys have said before me, so big shoes to fill. why did I become, or what about the role? So I think it's important for us to consider, like the CNC, it's a very much still a clinical role, the nurse practitioner in ED, but it's one that's still, it's not medicine, that this is really a nursing role that considers the patient as a whole. And I think that's really important that we remember that this nurse practitioner is not medical substitution, and that what we do is actually really quantifiably different, although we haven't been able to quantify it very easily. But the literature and our research shows time and time again that what we do as advanced practice nurses is consistently as good, if not better, than what our medical colleagues provide to patients, and with the greatest sense of patients tend to indicate to us that they're really satisfied with what they get when they see a nurse practitioner. So just teasing that out, of course, is sometimes tough, but I think we need to do a bit more work around what we bring as nurse practitioners that is a little bit different to how our medical colleagues might do it. Why did I do it? Well, I'm an early adopter, and I loved reading papers and listening to people, and I wanted to get on straight away and do those things straight away because I knew I'd been to conferences and I'd see things and how they'd happen, and why can't we do this in our department? And I was frustrated, I think, a lot by that. And so I wanted to adopt that, and I felt stifled a little bit, and I was like, well, what other roles are there in nursing that I can do this? And at the time when I embarked on doing this, there was no nurse practitioner studies that you could do. So I did have to go to the UK to study to be a nurse practitioner, and then brought it back to Australia. And then by the time that came back, it was now sort of embraced across Australia. It was great, actually. So I felt liberated to that. But I hated having the knowledge, knowing that I wanted to give that to my patients, and I wanted to be that guy that actually could communicate really well with the patient of what's going on for them, because it would annoy the shit out of me to see the doctors not communicate to the patient what's wrong with you, and then they'd come and you'd spend so much time with the patient trying to educate them. I was like, well, why don't I be that person? Why can't I just communicate that to the patient? So it sounds a little bit negative, but actually that was part of the motivator. It was, I really want, if this was my patient or relative, if it was my relative, I'd want them to know. So I felt like I really needed to own that, and that was a motivating force for why I wanted to become a nurse practitioner. I liked the responsibility, and I thought I was a relatively good communicator, but over time I realised I was actually quite crap at it to begin with. And knowing more actually was somewhat empowering for me. So how did I go about it? Well, Stuart Swadron, I don't know if anyone knows him who listens to MRAP, or he's an emergency physician, also was a primary care physician out of Canada. And he says in emergency medicine, it's really interesting in nursing that we have to know not just emergency care, we have to know the step beforehand, and we have to know the step after of what happens in emergency in order for us to better appreciate that. So I went about it trying to know both what happens in primary care and in pre-hospital care, and then so I did some paramedic stuff, and then I did some primary care nurse practitioner stuff, and then I went and spent some time in the ICUs and stuff as well. So I felt like it was a really important part of becoming a great emergency nurse, is actually spending time outside of emergency in order for us to appreciate actually where our colleagues need us to be, and also what makes for great care for patients and the forward trajectory of where patients are going to go. But to do that actually is really arduous, and you have to study and study and study and put more practice, and then study more, and then do more courses. And so after a time and some reflection, I realised that actually it's lifelong. This never ends, actually. And then, of course, the easiest, or the shortcut to that is actually me. I'm a listener. I like to listen, and that's how I learn. And I felt for me it was listening to abstract after abstract after abstract of research, and that way I felt like I was on top of things. And it took me a few years, but after a while, actually, I feel like I'm on top of actually most of the literature in emergency. So that took a while, but actually I would encourage anyone who wants to know more about that to listen to those programs. And then finally, how else, I think when you realise actually I need to probably do some study and start getting involved in that process as well, because research is really a cornerstone, I think, for what drives our practice. The future of the role, I think whilst it's been pigeonholed in the fast track sort of stuff, I think it's fairly clear that actually across the ED is where the nurse practitioner will have the most benefit across our EDs. And it's bizarre to me that we take someone who's been critical care trained all of their career and then we go and stick them in fast track, and that just doesn't resonate with me. And I think we probably need to look at embracing the nurse practitioner across the ED and in all EDs. I think clinical research is an area that we also need to go, and I think we need to consider that. The best piece of advice is, there's many. One is be better at communicating with your patients. And then the last one was actually from Eileen Rogan when I was working at Canterbury Hospital, and she said, I can't think of a single occasion where knowing more didn't help me or my patient, because you just can't substitute bullshit for not knowing. So make yourself more knowledgeable. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Wise words indeed. We have another point of view now from Alana Clements. So Alana is the clinical nurse consultant at St George Hospital and the New South Wales branch vice president for CENA. Alana has held emergency, trauma and disaster management nursing roles throughout Sydney. She's completed a master's degree and has published research on nursing leadership and communication. She's been recognised by her peers, receiving a leadership award in 2014, and she holds advisory positions with the New South Wales Emergency Care Institute and Agency for Clinical Innovation. Her interests are emergency and humanitarian nursing, and she's volunteered in medical clinics in Africa. So looking forward to hearing from Alana.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. This is obviously a little bit different to what some of the others have been talking about. So I'm going to be talking about my last experience, which was working in a place called Shukunga in Kenya. So just a bit of background. I know this is a bit wordy, but just to understand what Kenya is. So they have worked a little bit towards making some progress in some sectors. So the biggest sectors, obviously, for this country is around access to education, HIV prevalence and availability of antiretrovirals. Infant mortality, so as you can see, they have made some improvements. So it's now 74 in 1,000 from 2012. And vaccinations as well for everybody, not just children. However, there are some things that still continue to stagnate or even decline. And as you can see on the slide, they're pretty big issues that they're dealing with. There's also the humanitarian side where they do have a lot of refugees coming into what is already a impoverished nation. We're looking at about 500,000 from neighbouring Somalia and Sudan. And they're also tackling preventable diseases. So you're looking at HIV, malaria, TBs, respiratory diseases as well. So this is kind of where it taps into why I did some of the things that I did. So this is Shukunga. So just so you understand, it's a population of 30,000 and it's basically as remote as you can get for Kenya. So there's no roads, there's no running water, there's no electricity, and they have a higher rate of child mortality and also HIV. So it's about 15 to 20% in this province. Education obviously goes along with that. So probably just going back and why I did what I did, I like to push my own boundaries. I love emergency nursing and it's where I always end up going back to. But I like to be exposed to things that I'm not exposed to here. So obviously HIV is something we don't see very often here in the management of, and they have done a lot of work obviously with the UN and the WHO on dealing with these things in the African countries. I also like to push the boundaries a little bit on living in an environment that's outside our norm. So we were lucky enough to stay in a residence that was made out of brick and did have a roof, though no running water, obviously, and minimal electricity, but we were the only ones that had that in this whole community. So there's some of the reasons why I did it. So how I did it through an organisation called Kenya Aid, which is an Australian-based charity, which I was really lucky to actually work with the medical officer that started this charity 10 years ago after he visited Shukunga as a medical student. So they've done an amazing job in the last 10 years. So what they've done is, instead of just coming in, as we sometimes do, and say, this is the way you should be doing it, and, you know, we do it like this, and putting the way our values onto them, he set up a partnership with not only the government but also the local community, and essentially we call it the mayor of this community, and has spent a lot of time with him and building up staff within their local community to run their medical centre. So it's called Muradef, and that's what it looks like, and that is an actual ambulance that they have. There's only 2 ambulances in this whole province, and that's for about 1 million people. So they built this medical clinic, and they also started education. So education is obviously a big thing when it comes to prevention of these diseases. So they also opened the Twindale Memorial School, which I'll talk about a little bit. So what I did when I was there, well, pretty much what didn't you do when you were there? I think similar to some of the things that the remote nurses do, which is pretty much everything. So a lot of our stuff was around HIV, obviously, and they do rapid HIV testing. They're lucky enough to have that in this clinic, which we can do quite quickly, and we can start ARVs, which has taken a long time to get access to the antiretrovirals. Social support and medical care. The social support is they do have education sessions that people walk for miles to get, or Ks to get, and come and experience education with these trained medical officers. Malaria is a big one, so we do prevention around malaria, and even just as simple as giving out nets to families with children under the age of 5. Women's health, which is obviously a big concern, and we actually helped deliver that little baby that's in that picture, which was very exciting, but very primitive at the same time. So it really does push your norms of how you're used to working. The ambulance service, as I said, we actually drove that ambulance a few times on some very dodgy roads. It was a lot of fun, but it was very scary, and we sat in the back of it, and it is not comfortable. But they do transfer patients in there because they don't have a choice. And we were lucky enough to provide education at that local school, and a lot of it was around women. And sexually transmitted diseases. So we were good to tap into that age group of females in that environment, and it's even teaching them basic personal hygiene when it came to the menstrual cycle and how to manage that. So we had some new gifts for them when we went over. Obviously they can't use disposal things, so we had a company that built them these washable pads for them, and so we went through the education for that. So that's how sort of primary it is. This is one of the photos in there is the remote clinics that we did. So that's the photo that's obviously to the side there. And this is what we were working out of. Obviously, people don't have transportation, and if they are extremely unwell, we did a lot of home visits for people that were sort of stage 4 HIV, AIDS patients. But these were the clinics that we were running out of. That sheet there is how we could have some sort of privacy, especially when we're looking at preventative measures around like birth control and stuff like that, and putting implanons in and all these things. So as you can see, it was very challenging. Like our desks are nearly falling over there in that photo, but it's definitely worth doing, and the education's down below. So the future of the role, any help is needed. Nursing, medical, you're a mentor, you do education, you end up being an ambulance driver. There's lots of things that you can do. So it's definitely, if you're interested, please come and touch base with me and I can point you in the right direction. The best advice, I think, if you're really wanting to do something like this is be open to anything, and pick an organisation that you know and that you trust, because unfortunately there are ones that do take advantage of these, quite vulnerable populations in our world. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry, Alana. Our next speaker is Sarah Marmara. Sarah is the Principal Policy Advisor for Emergency Access at the New South Wales Ministry for Health. Sarah has 20 years' experience as an emergency nurse in a variety of senior roles, including clinical nurse consultant and nurse educator. Sarah is passionate about supporting emergency department staff to enable the delivery of high-quality, safe care for patients, as well as ensuring that statewide policy on the delivery of emergency care is sensible and applicable in the clinical environment. So we thank you just for that bit, Sarah. Okay. Please welcome Sarah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. So from the exciting world of nursing in Kenya to the exciting world of writing policies. So My title is an absolute mouthful, but I just thought I'd say for international guests, I work in New South Wales, which is the yellow highlighted bit on the Australian map there, and we are the largest health system in Australia, and we see about 2.7 million ED presentations per year. So the gigantic title of Principal Policy Advisor Emergency Access, what does that actually mean? Yes, I do write policy. No, I don't write them myself. I gather a group of all people from all around New South Wales. We've even had volunteers from Queensland to write policies for us in New South Wales when we put out the EOI. But I actually do a range of things, and I think over the 8 years that I've had this role, I've really been allowed, thankfully, to evolve the role into, quite a range of activities that I do. And there's just a bit of a snapshot there of what else I do. So policy, yes, I do a lot of statewide project management, which is always really interesting when you've got 183 emergency departments to consider that we have in New South Wales. I do a lot of performance improvement support with hospitals, work with hospitals that are getting a new emergency department to help the ED staff navigate that often very difficult path of how to figure out what you need in your new ED, and how to negotiate with architects who think they know everything about health and emergency departments. Do a lot to support our health minister, provide advice, obviously respond to the gigantic amount of media, constantly getting it in the neck in emergency departments, aren't we? And one of the biggest roles I see is also I do a lot of myth busting. So in a big system like ours, there's lots of misinformation. So I spend a lot of time, letting people know that if they've got a question or something's unclear, just give me a call and I can point you in the direction of where the resources and everything are. So I've combined how and why did I do it, and really I'm going to be brutally honest and say it was a total accident. So I was working as a nurse educator at the fabulous Prince of Wales Emergency Department, and I was contacted by a previous ED colleague who was working in a similar role to what I do now in the old Department of Health, wanting me to apply for a statewide project manager's role. He sent me the job description and I sent it back and I said, I don't even understand what that means. I cannot apply for that job. So once I learnt how to speak bureaucrat, I realised that I did actually have all of those, pretty much all of those skills. And the other skills that I didn't have, it was a role that I was able to grow and develop in. And I suppose the moral of the story here is don't underestimate yourself. If it's written in a crazy language that you don't understand, then you probably do have the skills. You just need to interpret whatever the job description is. And as I said, really, I've moulded the job into something that I believe is responsive to the needs of the health system in New South Wales and emergency departments. I think the role, just sort of continues to evolve as people sort of contact me. I also have a lot of opportunity I spend most of my time out in emergency departments actually talking to people. And I will say that, yes, I've been a bureaucrat for 8 years, but I do still work in my local emergency department. Thanks, Manly ED, for putting up with me. So the future of the role, the bosses that I work for, and I work across a couple of branches in the Ministry of Health, they always joke that they need to clone me. I think the value of a position such as mine that has broad system knowledge as well as clinical expertise in ED and is able to use that to influence decision making should not be underestimated. Clinicians, I think, tend to understand the issues in their own ED but are often limited in their understanding of broader system issues and maybe don't actually get exposure to that, and particularly the decision-making that occurs at that broader system level. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot of misleading information in a system as big as ours in New South Wales and, in the greater health system. And this puts emergency department staff and patients at risk of poor decisions being made as a result of this. And that, that to me is an enormous risk. So it's really important to have positions like mine that are able to provide advice that accounts for the broader system environment with that really detailed emergency expertise. So the best piece of advice I've ever been given was just remember there's nothing new in health, Sarah. We've done it all before, just in a different format using different words. And that was from my beautiful colleague Judy Willis, who was the equivalent of me for surgery in the Ministry of Health, who unfortunately has now passed away. And really it was a clinician's way of telling a fellow very, very overwhelmed clinician that there was help available and that the people around me had a million resources to help me do this really scary job. I do believe that we do continue to evolve in health, but I think the point is, that there's lots of resources available and you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And I do continue to share this sage advice with every new person that comes into my organisation.
Thank you, Sarah. Never a truer word has been spoken, has it? Our next speaker is Lisa Conlon. Lisa, I didn't have a bio for you, so I've done a quick Google stalk, so I hope this is all right. Maybe I'll let you introduce yourself, but we're going to get a military perspective from Lisa, so please join me in making her welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity of talking to you. I'd like to also acknowledge that I actually have a military colleague here who's probably hiding over in the corner there. I've been asked to talk to you really quickly about choosing a military life. Firstly, about the role and the differences that our role makes. First of all, as a nursing officer in the Australian Defence Force, we're actually commissioned officers. Some of the roles that I have had in my military career, were that I had quite a lot of variety of positions, both within health and outside of health as well. So we get to do lots of very various and quite exciting things. I had lots of clinical roles when I first joined. I joined as a perioperative nurse, and that was what I was employed for. I then did extra training and became a trauma and emergency and disaster nurse as well. We have the opportunity to take on command positions, so leadership is a very big part of our role, management. One of the other roles that I had was as a project manager, and there'll be a great picture for you that around. The differences I think the role has made to me is that it's given me the ability to contribute to not only defence health, but also to global health. I've, since leaving the Defence Force, have done a lot of work for World Health Organisation in emergency and disaster work. I've worked extensively overseas, and in fact I've just come back from living in Sweden and Denmark for 7 years. So I've kind of had the opportunity to do lots of really good things. We get to work in hostile and remote environments for often really long periods of time, and I'm sure Simone will back me up on this. The longest time I've been away from home was about 7.5 months, and I had a week back home during that time. You do what you have to do. It was a good experience. It's really enhanced my leadership and management abilities, and has helped me get civilian jobs. Prepared me to work in an international environment, both as an educator and as a researcher. Why military nursing? Why did I choose to be a military nurse? I think MASH had a lot to do with it. And for those of you that have ever seen MASH, I remember as a young kid looking at it thinking, that's what I want to do. And it's what I did do. The first time I deployed as part of a trauma resuscitation team, we wore our Hawaiian shirts until mine got completely covered in blood, and we threw them all away. But we did start off on a good note. Military nursing is very, very challenging. It's a very small group of people in the Australian Defence Force. It's very rewarding. It's probably one of the highlights of my career and my whole life. I've had really varied career opportunities. I've been a health analyst. I've been in charge of a medical school. I've deployed all over the place, so it's a great career opportunities. You're part of a big team, and although all of you belong to teams, our team's probably 56,000 strong, so we are part of a really big team. I've mentioned to you that we work in difficult environments and that we work internationally. This photo here was, it was in our high dependency ward on one of our ships. We actually had 2 ships like this, and I was the project manager. Probably could have been done differently, but I did a pretty good job, I think. So how did I do it? I joined as a peri-op nurse. I specialised in trauma and emergency and disaster nursing. My initial officer training was 9 weeks long down at HMAS Creswell. And if anyone's ever been to Jarvis Bay, that's the place to go. Working really hard during the day, finishing, going and getting your swimming cozies on and going down to the beach and swimming. I've mentioned about the health and management training. I've had lots of training that's helped me not only in my military career but my post-military career. And the positions I've had are really varied. I think I've been very lucky in the opportunities I've had. The future of the role, and this is the future of the role as the nursing officer in the Australian Defence Force. I think it will become more demanding. Our area of operation is ever increasing, getting bigger. Nursing officers are now taking on a lot more senior management roles. We now have and this won't mean anything apart from Simone, we now have a 1-star equivalent nursing officer, which is an incredible achievement for a very small bunch of nurses in a very, very big military pond. So we're making really quite big advancements. We've got more education opportunities. When I first joined, I was an old-fashioned hospital-trained nurse. The Defence Force sponsored me to do my bachelor's. They sponsored me to do all of my trauma and emergency and disaster training, my Masters of Clinical Nursing, and my doctorate, my PhD, which I did in military trauma teams. We have varied and very diverse operating situations, so areas of operation that we go into, and I think that's going to become bigger with the more time that we spend internationally. And we'll be doing more collaborative work with our international partners, which can be really quite challenging at times. My advice, this was in East Timor and was one of my greatest bits in my life, I think. This was a little boy that came into us. He had fallen into an open fire when he was a young child. His injuries had never been appropriately cared for. We did quite a lot of restorative surgery and rehabilitation on him, so a really nice thing for us to do, or nice thing for us to be part of. Being a military nurse is a very different way of life, but I think it's a great one. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have done it for such a long time. When I first joined, one of the things that my first commanding officer said to me was, remember, you're a military officer before you're a specialist officer. True, but we always are a nurse. And for those of you that will hopefully meet Simone afterwards, she wears our very proud burgundy stripe between her gold rings on her rank. So we are very proud of being nurses. One of my things is that you need to be very flexible and adaptable, and I think we do that in all of our careers. Get as much education and experience you can as being a leader and a manager in all situations that you can possibly get it in. Military nursing is not better than civilian nursing. It's just another opportunity, another career choice that you can make. And as Simone said to me as we were walking in, you're never too old to become a military nurse. So join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think we've all had a MASH moment at some point in our lives. Last but not least, hang on, I should put my glasses on again. I've just started doing this. I'm not in the habit yet. Okay. So Anne began her career at Liverpool Hospital in the UK, where she progressed to senior sister and clinical manager before completing a Bachelor of Science in Specialist Practice Emergency Care. She's a passionate emergency nurse to the Illawarra community. She's a mum of quads. You can see? Wow. Fitness addict, beach bum, Lonely Planet global explorer, and currently has a role at the Wollongong Hospital Emergency Department, of which she's now the nurse manager, and her vision is to manage and lead the ED team to continue to raise the standards, improve care and improve patient experience. So join me in welcoming Anne. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and thank you for that. I'm the nurse manager at Wollongong Emergency Department at the moment, and so obviously I've been asked just to discuss that role with you. The role and what difference does it make? Well, clearly there's the supervisory role and that responsibility of the staff in the department and overseeing the patient care that goes on. Then there's the management of and the budgetary requirements that I have to deal with. There's work schedules, meetings, maintaining standards and improving the care that we give, and that's through the education that we do, the audits and the projects that we run in the ED. It's all about leading the team to prevent harm to the patients, and it's also about preventing harm to the staff while they're working in that environment. It's about having strong communication and good leadership skills. But what difference does that role make? I think it's key in creating a safe and healthy environment that can support the work in the work that the team do and contribute to patient engagement. It can be influential in creating a professional environment, and it fosters the culture of the multidisciplinary team so that they're able to contribute to the improvements that go on and contribute to the patient outcomes, and they themselves can grow professionally. The role can also make a difference if there's solid support from the staff, and that's from the cleaner to the exec team. Everyone needs to work together to create cohesiveness for that one important person, and that's the patient. So why did I do it? Thank you. I did it because I'm passionate about leading an emergency team and a great emergency team down at Wollongong. I did it because I want to lead improvements in patient care, and I want to improve patient care, patient satisfaction and staff satisfaction, and with that it comes greater efficiency and better patient outcomes. And I did it because I like to be on the front line. Working with that team means that together we can make change and that we can be the catalyst to performance improvement. How did I do it? Well, my background, as I was just introduced, is in the UK, and I qualified in 2000. I became a clinical manager at the Royal Liverpool in the UK in 2003, just at the introduction of the 4-hour targets. And then, as stated, in 2004, life-changing event, my husband and I found out we were pregnant with quadruplets. So that kind of stopped us in our tracks for a little while. But after 10 months of maternity leave, I returned to the department, and in 2006, I continued my management pathway. I got a more senior role, which was still clinically led as a clinical manager. And then 5 more years down the line, I'd kind of pretty well had enough of the increasing pressures on the NHS. And so we decided to look to a change. In 2013, my husband and I decided that we were going to emigrate to Australia. And we brought the kids. I took a position in ED at Wollongong as an RN. And about, I think, 9 months later, I became a clinical manager there. And then from then on, I was the acting NUM2, filling in for the NUM2 role, and then took on the acting position as the ED nurse manager, and now successfully, I'm successfully in that role permanently now. And to be honest, the management and the exec team have been really supportive in with me with that. So that's been really positive. So I'm new to the role, really, so I just thought I'd just say a little bit about how I'm actually doing it then. So I'm advocating for the patients, patient safety-wise, and access to quality healthcare, and to the staff as well, to ensure that they've got a safe environment to work in. I participate. I'm visible on the department and I'm available. There's an open door policy for the management at Wollongong, and I think it really helps to create a collaborative work environment. I don't micromanage. Instead, I try to mentor, empower the staff and encourage them, and identify what their strengths are. I try to be as professional as I can be, through honesty and openness and respect, and obviously try and manifest the core values of the New South Wales Health. And I'm supportive as well. I support the staff through encouragement. I think it's good to challenge them to succeed. I like to identify what their talents are and allow them to use their expertise to perform and develop and help our department grow. Where do I see the future of the role? I believe the future of the role of the nurse manager is probably around challenging our thinking and practices to acknowledge that the heart of leadership is in the relationships that we make with our team and our staff. I think we should be developing strong leadership to improve job satisfaction so that we can retain staff, reduce staff turnover, and to improve the patient outcomes. The nurse manager needs to be supportive, inspire and motivate, and they need to, so that we can retain our nurses in our areas. And that way we can ensure the high quality patient care that we all expect. And to the best piece of advice and why? That's not it. We can keep going, yeah. We have a wonderful Deputy Don at Wollongong, and she has given upcoming managers and myself the advice that we should treat everyone equally and fairly in the workplace. She calls it the red lolly effect. If you give one staff member a red lolly, make sure you give them all a red lolly. I've taken that on board, and that's what I really try and work to in Wollongong ED. My advice, next one, thank you, is no matter what the situation, always stay calm and collected in front of the team. Because if you do that, it maintains their confidence and they believe that you are firmly in control and they have and you have their full support. Thank you.
Well, what a stellar cast of colleagues we have here. Are there any questions for any of our panellists? Oh, come on, you've got 8 of the best ED nurses sitting here. Hang on, there's one upstairs as well. Kate, if you go first, and then I'll come up to you in a minute.
It's just so inspirational to hear from you all. Almost like brings a tear to my eye when I'm listening to everyone's story. So thank you. This is a question for Anna and for Josh. Given you're both in management roles and you've come into a place where you've needed to change things, and I know that you've both done an amazing job with turning things around and being great leaders. What are the sort of, I guess, the key challenges or ways that you come into a new place and turn around that staff morale?
Who wants to go first? Josh?
It's a kind of poignant question because I've just started in Lockhart about 3 months ago, and they've had a succession of people who probably didn't have community and staff interests at heart. So I've come into a very weary team. And for me, it was about empathy, about acknowledging that I'm coming in and that I don't have the history with the community and with the staff, so acknowledging it, and also showing that, very important for me to show that I have walked in the shoes that everyone is walking in. I know my stuff. It's important, as you say, to go out on the floor, to help out when it's busy, not hide yourself in the office, and just be visible. And also, for me, it was about accepting the trepidation of the staff and community, and knowing that with time things will get things will get better.
Thanks, Josh.
I think probably just reiterate what Josh has said, and ask that question as well to the staff. Get them involved in what my vision might be for the department isn't necessarily what theirs is. So ask their opinions. Get out there and find out what they want from their department. I lead and facilitate it. It's not my department, it's their department, and I'm there just to lead them down that pathway as best I can. So that's probably it. Really just get them engaged and find out what their strengths and weaknesses are, and use that to create pockets in the department just to keep things moving. You know, we've got lots of people in that department who want to become CNSs, and helping them do that kind of thing. Champions, etc. Finding out what they really want to do and move forward with that.
This is a question for Josh. Most of us, we go to work. At the end of our shift, we go home. How do you, in your remote role, switch off? How do you find the constant immersive role? We work with a lot of remote nurses in our role, and you can go long periods of time without a break. So how do you do it?
It certainly was a big learning curve for me. One of the things I had to do was really draw a distinction between Josh, the matron, which they still call you matron up there, which I think is really quite cool. And I had to draw a distinction between Josh, the matron, and Josh in the community. So I, to some point, accept that I go down to the shop and I'm going to be asked when the doctor's coming into town, or when when their test results are back. I kind of had to accept that, but for me, it's been about really drawing that distinction that I'm not going to discuss personal things outside of the clinic, and that allowed me to become part of the community and to be respected in the community as well. And I think that's what sustained me throughout the time. Is that my family and friends might have been 10 hours away, but I made other family and friends within that community, and that was really a special thing that really got me for Arakoon. Is that I was there for 10 years, and I would see kids like that kid that I saw there who's 7 now, and I became involved to some extent in a lot of those families, and it was a real blessing and a real bonus to be able to be involved in that. It's a poison chalice as well, because towards the end of the time, I mean, it's not all puppy dogs and roses in Indigenous health. I'm sure people know that, and as the Don, I would get called in for all the traumatic stuff. So the multi-traumas, the suicides, all those sort of things. And again, that was a really hard thing to deal with. And also, I was very lucky to have a very good team with me. So we all supported each other. There were times when we'd drive the 80 kilometres out of town to the end of what they call the dogget, so we were allowed to drink. We get 2 metres over that line and set up the tent and go from there. So I guess, that's the one a distinction between work Josh and outside Josh, and a good support of family and friends in the community.